So I think a lot of people, most people, believe that police officers can withstand certain treatment, certain behavior until a certain line, and then they snap. When you're asking about abuse of power, what you're asking about is where that line is for this potential juror, and if they even believe that line exists. So you're going to want to ask questions like, well, if a police officer's authority is challenged, do you think that they're affected? How might they be affected? Is the fact that they don, that police uniform and that tool belt and that badge every day, does that mean that they're not necessarily affected by anything that they're going to encounter out on the beat? Open the conversation up generally. What about any authority figure? If anyone in a position of power is encountered with something that they perceive as disrespectful, illegal, or unlawful, right? How does that affect them? Do you believe that police officers have thick skin and that means that they're just going to take it? It's necessary to establish if your jurors believe there is a line at which the police officers will snap and where that line is. Because ultimately what you're guiding them to in your defense theory will be that once they reach this line and they snap, these officers then become reactive in all of the tactics that they employ. And this reaction and the need to come up with a narrative to justify their own illegal behavior is now why you're faced with these charges, why you get to meet this particular panel of people, why you have to protect your client from these unjust charges, right? Because at the end of the day, the stories don't make sense, they don't match up, whatever it is that you can discern from the evidence, from the witnesses, but you have to establish that line. You have to make sure your jurors are perceptive to that line, and you have to make sure that they agree with you. It's possible that the officer's going to react, and then they're going to have to justify themselves, right? So you're going to ask them, are they going to lie to protect their jobs, their livelihood, right? To protect the other brothers in blue. It's very different if in Bat Leo case, there's an officer that's lying to his sergeant on the side of the road when they employ their use of force, internal protocols, versus then lying about other officers, right? Coming in and lying in a pre-file conference to the prosecutor, coming in and lying and taking an oath in front of a jury, lying before all of them, lying when there's a judge in the room, right? So draw this out. You're going to want to know if jurors believe that for some officers, the ends justify the means, right? Is an officer going to bend the truth in order to protect the streets? Do you think that's okay? At what point? You're also going to get into whatever lane you pick for this officer, mistaken or lying. You do both. Are they lying or are they mistaken? A lot of times I see attorneys asking their panel members, well, let's talk about truthfulness, let's talk about police brutality, let's talk about the fact that they're going to abuse the badge, abuse their power, but we're not going to get into the fact that they've got more training and experience than the regular civilian witness. If you don't ask about this, I think you're leaving a lot of causes out there on the table, right? You're going to have a subsect of your panel that believes that police officers are just superhuman, right? They have been trained to be more perceptive, to pay more attention to detail in high-stress situations. And because of that, I'm going to believe them more. That's a cause. That's absolutely a cause. So you're going to want to ask them, are you more likely to give that weight to a police officer in high-stress situations? Is it that you tend to give a police officer more credibility because they are better able to perceive, make observations in these stressful situations? Is it less likely that they make mistakes? Are officers able to admit that they make mistakes, right? You draw it in throughout all of it, their attention to detail, their thoroughness. You ask your jury members, your panel members about the explicit, implicit biases, the external pressures, the internal pressures and desires that they feel in the interest of their case, right? Do we feel that police officers care about the people they arrest? Do they have an interest in seeing that the person arrested for the crime is convicted for the crime? Are police officers and police departments under pressure to close out cases? We had a huge scandal in Miami with the Biscayne Park chief because they had so many open home burglaries that they needed to start closing them out, right? Huge investigation done by our office on that point. These are the real external and internal pressures your officers may or may not feel, may or may not be relevant to your case and your defense theory. You got to know if your jury members are receptive to that theory.
So we find the questions that the bad juror wants to answer. We find the red meat questions that people are dying to answer. So Lisa had one up there that she and I worked on together for a case in which you had an athlete, an African-American college athlete accused of a sexual assault. It was multiple sexual assaults. Some women were white, some women were not white. The question is, how many folks think that basically when it comes down to sex, star athletes write their own rules, right? Now, there may be some truth to that is non-racial, but there is an aspect to that which is racial in modern America. There are people who believe, based on implicit bias, that African-American men athletes, male athletes, take advantage of women whenever they can. That's an attitude that's out there. I've heard jurors say it. So I'm going to ask a question that opens the door for somebody to answer that, and start a conversation with people who feel that. Not with people who are open-minded and don't have that prejudice, but with people who... Here's one that worked for me for a while, right? How many of you folks think that whether or not we have a problem with policing in America, Colin Kaepernick just went too far disrespecting the flag? Now, do I think that Colin Kaepernick disrespected the flag? I do not. He's a hero. I think he's a wonderful man who sacrificed a great deal for himself. And I probably shouldn't even say it, but I was kind of disappointed more people didn't take a knee at the Super Bowl, right? Because who knows what was going on in the minds of the others, and I shouldn't judge it. But asking the question about Colin Kaepernick, I got so many hands before the pandemic, okay? The George Floyd murder, the George Floyd killing changed things in a certain way. But lots of people who have strong biases about African Americans took them out, those biases out, visited those biases on Colin Kaepernick, right? That's what they did. And so opening that conversation up and talking to people who were hateful of Colin Kaepernick for doing this, right? For taking a knee, which many people consider a very respectful gesture. And I'm not going to get into whether they're right or wrong, or I'm right or wrong. I respect him. The people I'm talking about disrespected him and hated him for it. Doesn't matter whether I'm right or they're right. What matters in this case is for me to know who they are and make sure that they're not sitting in judgment of my African American client because they already have a bias, possibly. Now, it's possible that somebody has a non-biased judgment of Colin Kaepernick, but that's why we drill down. That's why it's not just the first question. That's why we have a conversation with those jurors. And so before the pandemic, I might have said to a jury, how many of you folks think that whatever problems we have with policing in the United States, whatever those problems are, Colin Kaepernick just went too far by disrespecting our flag? And then I'll have a conversation. And let's say we had 80 jurors. I bet you routinely 20, 25 jurors would raise their hands. And of those, maybe 7, 10, I'm just sort of ballparking my experience, would express an attitude that could get me into the range of maybe getting rid of them for cause. Not all of them are going to be gotten for cause, but with respect to those and the others, I also have information that allows me to exercise my peremptories, to know that number 9's got a pretty strong attitude here. I couldn't really get them to say something that would get them for cause, but I know that they're really not going to be looking at my African American client with open eyes.
So here are the things that you're thinking about, and whenever you're writing questions that work, you want to make sure that it has legal significance. You want to make sure that the yes means something, okay? And you want to make it easy to get a yes. You want to give them permission to say yes, that I can't be fair, I can't follow the law, I can't follow the judge's instructions. All right? And so the thing about it is that, I'm going to give an example from, the speech I'm going to give tomorrow, which is to a bunch of personal injury lawyers. So personal injury lawyers, one of the places, that it's very easy to get strikes for cause is on intangible damages. And PI lawyers all over will do this. They'll say, who here doesn't like mental anguish damages, or has a hard time with mental anguish damages, or has a bias against mental anguish damages, or doesn't like those types of damages, or would feel it difficult to award those types of damages? Not a strike, okay? And then one time I was giving a speech, and there's a judge in the audience, said, Robert, could you please tell this group of people how to get a strike for cause of mental anguish? Because he was a really good judge. He wanted to strike the people, but they didn't get there. I said, sure, Judge. People have strong feelings about certain types of damages. There's some people, if they were in a jury, could give money for lost wages, medical bills, pain and suffering, even punitive damages. There are other people who could award money for lost wages and medical bills. They simply couldn't award money for something intangible, like pain and suffering and mental anguish. Who here does that second category? You simply could not award money for something intangible, like mental anguish damages. Do you see the distinction? You want the yes to mean something, right? It can't be, yes, I like police officers or I respect police officers. It has to be that I would give them more credibility, okay? It can't be that, well, I would like for the person to testify, it'd be hard for me to not consider it, or it'd be difficult. I feel like that if they were innocent, they would testify, but I could follow the law, okay? So the deal is you want to nail the deal down. So here's the thing is I want to give just sort of some examples, some different areas. Like one of the hardest things, I know one of the other speakers is addressing this, so I hope I'm not stepping on it too much. I would have been here earlier, but there was ice where I was, and I was sort of a wimp about that. But one of the hardest things is like to address race, right? So you could say, would all the racists please raise their hand? All the people who don't like Mexican people, would you please raise your hand? Get them up there, okay? So not terribly. I mean, there are some places in East Texas, maybe, but not Belton, right? They're not going to raise their hand there. And so the thing is you have to figure out angles to get there. And so this is an example. People have strong feelings about testimony that comes through a translator. There are some people who can give the same credibility to testimony that was translated from another language as they would if the person spoke in English, testified in English. There are other people who just have to give, and feel free to take pictures, okay? There are other people who would just have to give less credibility to testimony that was translated. Which of those best describes you? And, sir, I love your hat. Obviously. Can you be a racist just for this moment? Okay. Which of those best describes you? They had to speak English. So can you tell me more about that? You're in my country, you got to speak English. Got it. And so even if there was an instruction that you're to give the same credibility, you just have to give less credibility. Is that fair to say? Okay. So very good. So I'm going to let you know, like, some of the answers you get are, well, if somebody isn't speaking English, that makes me think they're not here legally. And if they're not here legally, then they've already broken the law. It's like a burglar breaking into my house, And so that right there you have it. So well, I'm going to tell you that that's not really going to be an issue in this case, their immigration status. But is that thought something that's going to affect how you would decide the case? Okay. Thank you so much. Even if you had an instruction that that's not effective, that's just something you can do. Is that fair to say? Okay. Thank you so much. Who agrees with this juror? Please raise your number card. Okay. Tell me about that. Fair to say with regards to law, et cetera. So y'all are getting the form here, right?